Isabel sat back on her heels and watched flames spring up in the grate. They were pale, and there was no heat in them. She was cold, she was tired, her back ached and her eyes stung from the smoke. But at least it was lit. As long as she looked only at the blue and yellow flames, she could begin to feel at home. Philip opened the door. His arms were piled with medical textbooks, right up to his chin. "I went to the butcher and got a meat pie," he said proudly. "It was off the ration." Isabel reached out and touched his hand. "That was very clever of you." They had been married for 2 months. Children of wartime, and all they asked of food was that it should fill them. Isabel was a poor cook. Fortunately, Philip's mother was no better. He never complained, and was as proud as Isabel when she brought her watery stews and dense cakes to the table. Footsteps crossed the floor above their heads. Slow, heavy, deliberate. All the way to the window they went, and all the way back. The landlady. Isabel had only glimpsed Mrs. Atkinson's ponderous back view, clad in a grey working pinafore, disappearing upstairs. That was her idea of welcome, evidently. In the morning, Philip left for the surgery at 8. By 10 o'clock she had made the bed, washed up, and laid their clothes in the drawers of the ugly old chest. Upstairs, the landlady coughed. Too close, thought Isabel. They had divided the house into flats, but they couldn't quite separate the lives within it. Outside the windows, an early mist was thinning. There would be sun. She would go shopping, then she would change into her walking shoes, and walk where there were no shops or houses or watchful, secretive faces. She walked for an hour and a half, about 4 or 5 miles, and then ahead of her, a perimeter fence stretched as far as she could see. It was broken down in places, and the wide gates swung open. She knew at once what it was. She came from the flatlands of Suffolk, and during her wartime childhood, she had woken night after night to the thunder of Lancasters overhead as they took off from the airfield. Isabel hadn't known there was a bomber station so close to Kirbyminster. She shaded her eyes and scanned the wreck of the airfield. She could pick out the control tower, hangars, admin buildings, roads, Nissen huts, the main runway disappearing into the distance. She glanced quickly behind her. Of course, there was nothing there. It was the atmosphere of the place. That was all. Doors were hanging off the buildings. Broken glass caught the light. Briskly, as if someone were watching her, Isabel walked away. A feeling of fear was in her. It seemed that if she put out her hand, she could touch thousands of lives which had never ended, but had broken off into a silence that hung more heavily than any noise. They were here. She knew it. She turned and saw the sun's reflection pulse at the top of the control tower, where the glass must still be unbroken. Light flashed and flashed again. Every day it grew colder. One night, waking cold and not wanting to spend the rest of the night shivering, she wrapped Philip's dressing gown tightly around her and went to find something more to put on the bed. In the living room, there was a tall, built-in cupboard, with a box cupboard above, where Philip had put his old textbooks. She remembered him saying that he'd shoved some other stuff to the back. It could be clothes, but it might be blankets. She fetched one of the dining chairs, piled 3 of Philip's thickest textbooks onto the seat, and clambered on top of them. Her hand seized a thick fold of cloth. Pulling the thing towards her, it came at her in a rush, almost toppling her backwards. It was a coat. An RAF officer's greatcoat. There was the heavy, slaty, grey-blue wool, the buttons, the belt with its heavy brass buckle. There was cobweb on the outside, but when she unfolded it, The cloth was clean. The coat was heavy and felt stiff without a body to shape and warm it. She held the coat up to her face and breathed in the smell of it. There was a dry reek of mothballs and old woolen cloth, but there was also a faint, acrid tang of burning, and then a smell which flooded Isabel with her East Anglian childhood, lying in the long grass, listening to the drowsy chirr of crickets and the skirl of skylarks, and far off another noise, deep, thunderous, the testing of engines. The coat would be so warm. Even now, its heavy wool shielded her from the chill of the room. Suddenly, without giving herself time to think, Isabel untied the cord of Philip's dressing gown. Underneath, she was naked. She slipped her arms into the coat and put it on. It was much too big for her. She was lost in it. But warm as the coat was, she shivered, and as quickly as she had put it on, she stripped it off again. She pulled Philip's dressing gown back on and tied the cord tightly. She spread the coat on her side of the bed and eased her cold self between the sheets. The greatcoat came down over her, moulding itself to her, pressing her into the mattress. She woke with light in her eyes. Philip had pulled the curtains back and was standing by the window fixing his cufflinks. "Isabel, what is that thing on the bed?" "I found it. In the cupboard. I was freezing." She peered at him over the sheet, her eyes brilliant. How odd the coat looked from this angle, he thought. But it was just a trick of the light. After breakfast, when Isabel went out into the hall with her shopping bag, the landlady was there. She was staring at Isabel with peculiar concentration, as if there was something she wanted of her and wasn't sure that she would get. "I found an RAF greatcoat in one of the cupboards," Isabel said. "There aren't enough blankets. If it's not in use, I'd like to put it on our bed." Mrs. Atkinson's eyes were avid on Isabel. The odd thing was that she didn't seem surprised. She looked satisfied, as if she'd eaten something good. "You're welcome to it. I should have thrown it away years ago. It's nothing but a nuisance to me." "Then we'll use it." "You do that, Mrs. Carey." The landlady looked drawn, exhausted. It was impossible to guess how old she was. She had done everything to obliterate her looks until she was scarcely a woman at all. Perhaps she'd been different when Mr. Atkinson was alive. I should feel sorry for her, thought Isabel. But there was still that troubling glint of satisfaction in the landlady's eyes. Isabel went to the shops. The grocer's wife was a Lancashire woman, eager-tongued and playful. It was a quiet day, and Isabel was the only customer in the shop. "The town must have been busy during the war, with the RAF." "Oh, it was. It was like the Wild West in the Red Dragon on a Friday night. And then when they were on ops, it was a graveyard. If a crew didn't come back, you'd know about it. Oh, all the girls were after 'em, but there was more babbies than wedding rings came out of it." A strange excitement rose in Isabel. "Were there many raids on the town?" "Your house had a near miss, didn't you know?" The grocer's wife gave her a sharp look. Isabel was willing the woman to say more. The figure of the landlady hung in her mind, grey, taciturn, hostile. The shop doorbell tinkled. 2 women in battered tweed suits and hats entered, at their ease, and Isabel was forgotten. That night, Isabel slept heavily under the greatcoat. Somewhere, in the depths of sleep, she heard the phone ringing, and then felt the heave of bedclothes as cold air trickled over her body as Philip got out of bed to go out on call. A tapping noise wove itself into her dream. Tap, 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 louder and louder. Isabel was bolt upright in the bed. Her heart thundered. It was a bad dream, it wasn't real. But she could still hear the tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, insistent, determined. It was coming from the living room. It sounded like someone tapping on glass. On a window. Philip must have gone out without his key, and he was tapping on the front window to attract her attention. She snatched up the greatcoat and pulled it around her. She ran over the cold lino, into the living room, and drew back the curtains. There was a man outside the window. A man in an RAF greatcoat. An officer. There he was. An everyday figure, safe as houses, but her heart clenched in fear. It was the look on his face. Recognition. A familiarity so deep he didn't have to say a word. But she had never seen him before in her life. She stared at him. He was young, her age, maybe a year or two more. And then she saw that his lips were moving. Isabel. Isabel. How did he know her name? She snatched at the curtains and dragged them across. The man was blotted out. The room was dark. Was he still there? On the other side of the glass? Waiting? But then she reproached herself. Why had she pulled the curtains in his face like that? What a coward she was. Cautiously, Isabel drew back the curtains again. There was no one there. She took a deep breath. Of relief, of disappointment, she didn't know. She opened the window and leaned out into the cold night. The streets were still, and the town muffled in sleep. She strained for footsteps, but there was nothing. She was about to draw her head back inside when a sound arrested her, a vibration very far off, chafing the air. She listened for a long time, but the sound wouldn't come closer and wouldn't define itself. As it faded, it pulled at her teasingly, like a memory that she couldn't touch. Isabel piled the fire high with the logs that Philip had just been given by one of his patients. Coal was still on the ration, so now at last she had some chance of getting the place warm. She would make herself busy all day. It would probably take most of it for her to achieve a steak and kidney pudding. By midday, she was deep in flour. The doorbell rang. She wiped her hands on her apron, unlocked the door, and opened it. It was him. He looked at ease, as if expected. He was a tall, fair man, strongly built. He had the Viking look of men from the far northeast. He was not quite smiling at her. "Aren't you going to let me in?" he asked, and looked beyond her into the hall. "There's no one here, is there?" He said no one, as if it were a code word for a name they both knew but would not speak. Isabel shook her head. She was sure the landlady had gone out. Why does he speak to me like that? As if he knows me. "I'm all over flour," she said, looking down at herself deprecatingly, although she could tell from his intentness that it was her he saw, not the flower. "Better not stand around on the doorstep," he said, glancing behind him. Of course he shouldn't, she realised. Anyone might see him. Easily, familiarly, he walked straight through the living room to the bedroom and sat down on the bed, heavily, hands on knees, head forward, like a man who had run a race. He was utterly exhausted. "Fog's worse than this out at the airfield." "Oh," she said. Her thoughts moved strangely, down paths that were foreign and yet entirely familiar. She was Isabel Carey, and yet these were thoughts that Isabel Carey had never had. She knew what he meant, and she ought not to know it. "Fog," she repeated. "That's good, isn't it? You can get some sleep tonight." He shrugged. She offered him a cup of tea. A smile. "Haven't you got anything stronger?" There was half a bottle of gin left in the sideboard. She poured him a glass and looked at it doubtfully. It was huge. He raised his glass to her and threw back the gin. Instantly, he looked better. She took his coat, folded its bulk, and laid it on the bedroom chair. He was taking off his boots. With a sudden movement, he threw himself down on the bed, full length, staring up at the ceiling. "You don't know how good this feels," he said. And then he was silent, lost in thought. "Now, come over here and lie down." "But my hands are covered in flour." "I don't care. They're your hands." His eyes were half shut. She saw how dead-beat he was, marked, weary skin. He smelled of cigarettes, sweat, metal, the soap he'd scrubbed himself with before he came to her. Philip is much more handsome, she thought, but this man was looking into her face, her eyes, as if they knew each other so well they didn't have anything to explain. They could be silent if they chose. He was a stranger, but she knew him. Every word he spoke, and every shadow of his expression, fitted patterns she had never seen before, but which had always been there, beneath the skin of her life. He lay perfectly still, as if sleep had caught him in the middle of a breath. She backed away, into the kitchen where her suet pastry still lay on the table. Over the sink, she had placed a tiny mirror, and her face stared back at her, pale and startled, with bright eyes. She bit her lip, hard, until it hurt and the skin went white. It was real then. She was this person, Isabel Carey. She lay down on the bed beside him. She put out her hand and touched his shoulder. Here they were, the two of them. She thought of the tapping at the window. Maybe, on other nights he had tapped and she hadn't heard. He'd been outside for a long time, but now he was here, in her bed. Isabel woke at 3. There was nobody beside her. She rolled over and pressed her face to the pillow where he had laid his head. Cigarettes, a smell of engines, something men put on their hair. She knew that she would say nothing to Philip. If she did, he would be furious. He would make inquiries, call the man a peeping Tom. The RAF officer would not come again. She huddled down tightly, arms crossed over her breasts, knees drawn up. Not because she was cold. She held herself like someone hiding a secret. A little later, she got up. The important thing was to finish making the steak and kidney pudding. She tied on her apron, and as she did so, she heard the landlady's footsteps overhead. She must have come home while I was asleep. All the way to the window, Mrs. Atkinson walked, back to the door, and then to the window again. The usual tread, too heavy to be ignored. Isabel switched on the radio, tuned it to the light programme, and turned up the volume high on Music While You Work. Harry Leader's sax soon took care of the footsteps. She hummed along loudly as she poured a cup of hot water into the sticky gravy, stirred it, and set the pan back on the hob. She was a young, married woman in her own kitchen, listening to the radio as she prepared her husband's meal. No one watching her could imagine anything different. The recipe text danced. Grease the basin, line the basin, pour in prepared meat and gravy, cover and seal, steam for 2.5 hours. By then, Philip would be home. The door to the bedroom was ajar. What a ridiculous arrangement it was, to have the kitchen off the bedroom. She refused to turn. He was there again. He was still lying on the bed, but he was awake now, and refreshed. Some colour had returned to his face. His arms were folded behind his head, and he was watching her. His name was Alec. She knew it now. It had come into her mind as she slept beside him, as if he had whispered it into her ear. "Alec," she said, turning. His eyes were narrowed to watch her more closely. They were dark blue, navy almost. Suddenly, a low vibration turned into sound. He moved his head sharply. It was the same heavy sound she had heard before, coming closer. The deep thrumming of Lancaster engines as the aircraft came low, ready for landing. Alec was sitting bolt upright. His expression had changed completely. He was anxious, charged for action. He swung himself off the bed and came to her. He stood very close. Too close. And again she was afraid. "I've got to go." "I know." His boots were on, and his greatcoat wrapped around him. He set his cap on his head and he was gone. She heard the door bang, and ran out into the hall after him, pulled open the front door and looked right and left up the street. There was no one. The fog pushed towards her, and she shivered. You couldn't even see the Minster clearly. How would the Lanc ever land safely? As she thought this, she realised that the noise of its engines was fading. Fading, and then gone. He'll come back, she thought. It wasn't speculation. She was sure of it. How could he not? That evening, the flat still breathed his presence, even though it was Philip who sat opposite her, eating the steak and kidney pudding. The landlady was walking again. Just listen to her, that bloody woman. It's like living with a jailer. She's doing it on purpose. She knows it drives me mad. His handsome face was worried, but only because she was upset. Forget about her, Is. Let's go to bed early and get a good night's sleep for once. In bed that night, Isabel lay stiffly on her side of the mattress. Philip had rolled off her and fallen deeply asleep. I'll never have a baby as long as we stay here, she thought. It was as if the landlady's spirit was everywhere, in the fabric of the house and in the waves of sound that beat against her eardrums. Philip said he couldn't hear it, but she didn't believe him. He was trying to pretend that there was nothing wrong. That woman, that damned woman! She was walking again with venomously light tread, as if she could judge to a nicety exactly how much noise would keep Isabel awake without disturbing Philip. We'll never get away, thought Isabel. She'll make sure of that. But she could rebel. In one sweep, she was out of the bed, gathering the greatcoat round her body. There was the moon and the fanlight over the front door. Following her own moon shadow, she crept upstairs. She raised her fist and rapped hard on the landlady's door with her knuckles. the house went still, listening. After a few seconds, the door was flung open. Barely breathing, Isabel spread herself out against the wall, hidden in the darkness behind the door. "Is it you?" came the landlady's voice, oddly eager, oddly young. "Is it you? Where are you?" She was at the banisters, looking down into the hall. Isabel moved sideways a fraction. But it was not the landlady at all. This woman leaned forward so that her hair swung and shone in the moonlight, and called again into the well of the hall, "Is it you?" After a minute, the woman turned. Now she had her back to the moon, and there wasn't enough light to see her face. Her head was bowed. She walked back to the flat's entrance and pulled the door shut behind her. The landing still quivered with the words the woman had called out so eagerly. "Is it you? Where are you?" It was a younger and sweeter voice than the landlady's, but the accent was the same, and the voice bore a family resemblance. Even the shape of the slender body that leaned over the banisters wasn't entirely strange. The landlady must have a young relation staying with her. A niece, perhaps. Isabel waited. There were no more footsteps. As silently as she had come, she tiptoed down the stairs and back into the flat. Alec came in the afternoons, or late at night when Philip was out on call. He never stayed long. Sometimes it was a bare minute, sometimes half an hour. He would enter like a sleepwalker, unsmiling, so weary he could barely speak until he'd had the first drink. Isabel understood it took him time to come back to himself when he came to her straight from a debriefing. The racket of the lank was still going through him, as if he'd been welded to the throttles and couldn't disengage. She saw the vibration in his fingers. She offered him food, but he was never hungry. Sometimes he had a beer, but more often it was gin, because that worked more quickly. After the first couple of days, she realised that she would have to be careful. Philip had noticed the level going down in the gin bottle. He turned to her, and his eyes had a hurt look, as if he'd caught her out in behaviour that violated his idea of her. Suddenly, she was afraid of what he might look like if he ever knew that she had deceived him. In bed that night, he said suddenly, "Isabel, there's nothing wrong, is there?" "No." She lay very still, waiting, but she didn't think he had fallen asleep. "Philip?" No reply. But he was awake, she was sure of it. And for an instant she hated him, because he was allowing her to fall like this, away from him. "Very convenient," said a cold little voice inside her. "Blame your husband, why don't you?" She was no longer quite certain of what was really happening. Her mind was filling with memories that came from somewhere outside her own life. It was like watching a film, as the images entered her and became part of her. They were her memories now. It was because of Alec. He was doing it. Or was it? She didn't know. One day, Alec arrived with his motorbike. He didn't seem to care about anyone seeing him. He was wearing his flying jacket, a leather helmet with a strap under his chin, and goggles pushed up on top of his head. She got on the motorbike, sitting behind Alec, her arms around his waist. "We'll go as far as the airfield," he said. Once they were out of town, he opened the throttle. As he leaned, So she leaned. The broken fence stretched out ahead of them. Alec pulled over by a gate at the entrance to a farm track. "Are you frozen, darling?" The word went through her. Philip never used endearments. She was or Isabel. He hadn't been brought up to sweetheart a woman, and she understood that to him it was both unnatural and unnecessary. They were married. They lived together. He entered her body. That was the reality, not words. Alec was standing by the leafless hedge, lighting a cigarette. Around his mouth there were grooved lines. His face was young, but not his eyes. Those dark blue, almost navy eyes of his had seen so much that they could be surprised at nothing. "Come on," he said urgently. He pushed open the gate and led her towards a hut in the corner of the next field. Inside, the floor was rotten, but it was dry enough. A shadow passed over his face. He glanced around quickly. Suddenly, naked fear seemed to possess him. "What's the matter?" "I couldn't see the mattress. I thought someone must have moved it." She knew at once that he had seen what she saw. The carpet rotted into the rotting wood, rust and decay. But he was strong. "It's all right," he said, pointing down. "There it is. Mattress. Alec and Izzy. For the use of. Must have been a trick of the light. My God, the things you see when you've been staring into the dark for hours." "It's all right, Alec." There was no mattress. He spread the greatcoat out carefully over the floor, then sat down and smiled up at her. "Come here, Izzy. We haven't got much time." It was soft underneath her, as if they were lying on a mattress. She felt the prickle of the greatcoat as he pulled away her clothes to touch her. Then they were all lips and mouths, spit and wet hair trailing across her face, and she was opening herself to him wider than she had ever known, and he was in her, part of her, so deep she forgot everything. They belonged together. Time had cracked and given them to each other. She shifted position. Her thighs were sticky. He'd come inside her, and she'd held him tight, not wanting him to withdraw, even though she knew they should be careful. "I must go home," she thought. "I'll be late." Home. But instead of the drab rooms of the flat, a grey stone farmhouse filled her mind. There was a line of washing blowing. The back door was half open, and she found that she knew what lay inside the kitchen. As Isabel watched, it was all beginning to come clear, as the flat and Philip grew cloudier and more distant. These were that other one's memories, and now they were hers too. The farmhouse, her life there, the woman she'd been. Her husband, Jeff, had met Alec in the pub, got talking about cricket, and asked him over for high tea on Sunday. Jeff had told her Alec was from Newcastle and he'd been over in Canada on the air training plan. Canada. She caught her breath. What she was remembering did not belong to her. "I am Isabel Carey," she told herself. "I live in Kirbyminster. My husband is a doctor, and his name is Philip Carey." Alec looked into her face. "Just think, Izzy, if it could always be like this. As if there wasn't any time." "But if there wasn't any time, then I'd never be able to see you." He shook his head, smiling as if he knew something she did not. "If there wasn't any time, then you would always be able to see me. You don't understand, do you? I'll always come to you." As they came out of the hut, a Lank engine caught, then roared at full throttle. Then the sound eased and died back. "You've got to go," she said, before he could say it. He swung himself onto his motorbike, kicked down on the starter, and he was gone. She looked along the perimeter fence. Through the dazzle of winter light, she thought she saw the shadow of a lank, with ground crew swarming over it. Suddenly, the people were gone. There was the control tower, with its windows broken, and obscenities scrawled on the brick. The corrugated iron roof of the guardhouse had rusted. Every soul had vanished, as if blown away by the wind. But they were still there. She knew that. It was only that, at this moment, she couldn't see them. Then, Alec was there at her side. "Ops are on for tonight," he said. "I'll come to you straight after the debrief, Izzy. I'll knock on your window. Swear you won't go to sleep." He reached out for her. "Counting tonight. Only 4 more ops to go until the end of the tour. 4's got to be a lucky number. 4-leaved clover. Remember?" She realised it was always between the 26th and 27th ops that he came to her. He'd got through so much. Why shouldn't he start believing he was going to get through it all? "Besides which, I've got your knickers. Air crew. For the protection of." She laughed. He'd stolen her pre-war silk knickers. They went with him on every op. He wouldn't let her wash them. She pretended to be shocked, but she knew it meant there was nothing of her that he didn't want. Once, Alec had let his guard down and talked of the future, what they might do. They'd meet in York or Lincoln. They'd get a hotel room. They'd be just another couple. It was bad luck to talk about the future. No, that wasn't it. Not exactly. He had to be 100% here to fly, to keep his crew alive. There couldn't be any part of him that was absent. He needed to be faster by a fraction of a second when Sid's voice banged through the intercom, "Corkscrew port! Go, go, go!" He was silent, frowning. She knew from his face that there was something more he wanted to say. "It's Rod. He's not so good. He's a bloody fine wireless op, but these bloody stand-downs are getting on everyone's nerves." He'd told her once that there was a look you saw sometimes, the chop look. There was no other word for it. When you saw it, you didn't say anything. Crew had it when they weren't going to come back. They didn't know it, but something in them did, and if you were unlucky, you glimpsed it. Nothing could be said. He knew what had to happen before there was mourning for him. She held him close. She knew the odds too, but they couldn't apply to Alec. How could someone be present and then ripped out of life in a few hours' time? But there was nothing easier. He knew it, and he'd made her know it. Time swung, and then righted itself. The other one's memories swarmed in her head, and then they faded. She was Isabel again, and around them, the airfield spread out in dereliction. They walked together through the unguarded guardhouse into the mess, pushing aside the door which hung off its hinges. A band was playing. "Not a bad band," Alex said. "Shall we dance?" They revolved for a while, to music she couldn't hear. It was easy enough to follow his lead as he steered her expertly to avoid the other dancers. After a few minutes he let go of her. He looked around, his face knitting with anguished bewilderment. How much she wanted him to see that everything he feared had ceased to exist. There were no more ops to be flown. There were no lanks to fly them. The concrete runways and taxiways were broken up and full of weeds. He pulled her to him. "I'll see you in the morning." His voice was sure, but his eyes stared past her into the dusky winter afternoon. The whole weight of the house seemed to press down on Isabel. Alec's words echoed in her head. "I'll knock on the window. Swear you won't go to sleep." Her heart clenched at the remembered expression on his face. Whatever happened, she knew that Alec would come for her, and she would slip into that other life again, her mind clouded with memories that weren't hers, her body moving to rhythms it had learned elsewhere. If she told Philip, he'd think she was mad. That would be dangerous. That night, the dark hours wore on. There was a wind that spattered rain on the bedroom window. In the morning, she had a headache. Philip hadn't had time to light the fire. The flat was cold. She clasped herself, shivering. She pressed the woolen cloth of the greatcoat to her lips. "It's broad daylight," she told herself. "He won't come now." Isabel fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke because there was a weight beside her, pressing into her body. Alec was sitting on the bed. "I hope you don't mind," he said. "The door was open, so I came in. I didn't mean to scare you." "I'm not scared." "I had to come. There isn't much time. Ops were scrubbed last night, after the briefing. Bloody Met bods playing silly buggers again. We should have gone. All this hanging about is no good." He was afraid. They'd been caught in searchlights on the last trip, and by a miracle he'd got them away. All those searchlights locked onto you so you could read a bloody book by them while you waited for the shell burst to blow you out of the sky. Haul the plane into a screaming dive until it sounds as if every rivet is about to burst open. The lights tracking, and you, pinned against the darkness, spread out, the target for everything. They got out of it that time, but they wouldn't again. "I just thought I'd like to see you," he said. "But I've got to get back." She opened the door to the hall and peered upstairs. Nothing stirred. He was already at the front door, tugging the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. He looked up. No wonder, there's a ruddy great bolt on it. The door was locked and bolted, but Alec had come in. He hadn't knocked on the window or rung the bell. Suddenly he swore and jerked his hand away. As he nursed his hand, she saw blood. He went at the bolt again, roughly. As more drops of blood fell, she got a handkerchief out of her dressing-gown pocket. "Let me tie this around it for you. That bolt's rusty. You don't want to get rust in the cut. For God's sake, Izzy." He had almost shouted it. "Alec, don't." But it was too late. Upstairs, a door opened. Alec looked up, past Isabel, towards the landing. She heard the intake of his breath. His face froze. There was the landlady, in her grey pinafore, with her hair scragged back. She was stock still, her face white in the shadows, staring at Alec. She looked him up and down, as if he were a thing, a creature, loathsome. She didn't even glance at Isabel. Slowly, deliberately, she walked to the landing banisters and gripped them, and then she spoke, but only to Alec. "You didn't come. You said you'd come, and you never came." Isabel saw Alec start forward, as if to go up to her, but the landlady put out her hand to ward him off. Alec stared up at her. "You weren't there," he said, and then he raised one hand, as if to shield his eyes from the sight of her. And no wonder, thought Isabel. She was shriveled, her face skull-like, her skin colourless. There was a long silence. Isabel watched them, as if she were watching a film. This Alec was a stranger. She could not believe that he had ever touched her. She knew that he didn't belong to her. He had never belonged to her. The landlady's anger had gone quiet. They no longer seemed to know that there was anyone in the house but them. "Alec," Isabel said quietly. The landlady's gaze slipped to her face and then away. Had she seen her? There was no telling. The landlady turned at last and slowly made her way back into her flat. She looked like an old, old woman, struck by a blow from which she would never recover. Alec was gone, and Isabel was alone in the hall. She looked down, expecting to see nothing, but the dark splash of blood was there on the tiles. The stain was dark red, and sticky on her fingers when she touched it. She went into the kitchen, took the wooden cover off the bath, and ran the water way past the painted line 5 inches from the bottom of the tub. She got in, then lay back until she was completely underwater. She opened her eyes and looked up through the distorted surface. Upstairs, it was silent. Of course she had never slept with another man. It was a crazy fantasy. She'd been on her own far too much and had lost her sense of what was real and what was not. The war had been over for years. The aircrew had all gone back to their lives, if they still had them. The airfield was deserted. For the first time in weeks, she was wide awake. That night, Isabel woke to the noise of Lancasters. They were taking off at 2-minute intervals, one, and then another, and then another, and then another. The air filled and rumbled with their thunder. Alec had gone. This was the 27th op. This one, and 3 more to go until the end of the tour. It had begun. Alec had climbed out of the crack of time where he met her over and over again between the 26th and the 27th op. The crew of poor old bloody Katie were off on their trip to the big city. She had to go out to the airfield. Philip wouldn't be home yet, perhaps not until morning. She grabbed the torch, and after a moment's thought, she took the greatcoat from the bed and put it on. Outside, the street lamp had been turned off, but there was a moon half full, with thin clouds racing over it. She walked as fast as she could, keeping herself from breaking into a run. Her heart thudded with terrible urgency. She was at the perimeter fence. Now, in the winter darkness, the whole base was alive. The Lancs were in the circuit, waiting their turn to land. They were descending one by one towards the airfield. The thunder of them went through her. The control tower blinked. Now it was quieter. A straggler came in, and then another. She waited, tense with fear. He had to come now. There was only so much fuel and so many more minutes in the air. Unless he diverted, unless Katie was damaged, unless... She couldn't see clearly. The fog was rolling in from the east, hiding the runway, then swirling away again. Those bloody Metbods, she heard in her head. Got it wrong again. She heard it, lumbering down the sky. It sounded all wrong. It was a Lanc, but the engines were jagging at the air, coughing, stuttering, and then suddenly they bellowed, as if the pilot had forgotten to switch off the superchargers, and the Lanc was coming down too fast, too steep, too close. A brilliant light came on at the end of the runway. It was a chance light. She knew what that was for. He had got to land. and so they were giving him the light that was strong enough to burn through the fog. He hadn't enough fuel to reach another airfield, or else there was too much damage. The fog swirled clear, and for a second she saw lights, figures, and then the vast wallowing shadow of the Lank as it swooped for the runway. But it would not go down. The engines screamed as the thing passed over her, 50 feet above her head. He had missed the runway. He was pushing the throttles forward as far as they would go, trying to get power, trying to lift her over the admin block and the hangars. The black thing clawed at the sky, went up, hung there, roaring, then stuttered, stalled, and plunged out of sight beyond the airfield. There was absolute silence. She didn't think she heard the explosion. The air around her gathered itself, solidified, became a wall. It pulsed, breaking against her body again and again. She was falling forward. She was on the ground, with her face in wet grass. When she got back home, there was no car outside. Philip must still be at the hospital. She let herself in quietly and blinked in the sudden light. The landlady was sitting on the stairs. She looked at Isabel, her gaze sharp. She looked tired, but somehow satisfied. Like a cat, thought Isabel, that knows it has killed and will not be hungry for a while. "It's done then," said the landlady. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean." Isabel folded her arms. You won't get away with that, she thought. She was bold now, and she could ask what she wanted, because no one else would ever know. "Was he killed?" she asked. "Of course he was killed. They were all killed. All the crew." The landlady's top lip lifted, showing her teeth. "I'm not talking about them." "Then who are you talking about?" "I'm tired. I'm going to bed. Don't bother waiting up. He won't come back. And you can take off that coat. It doesn't belong to you." Isabel looked down at herself. Of course, she was still wearing the greatcoat. "It belongs to me as much as it belongs to you," she said. The landlady got up stiffly, banged her hands together, turned, and went upstairs. For a moment, she felt him again. She smelled oil and sweat, and the faint tang of his oxygen mask on his breath. His fingers tasted of nicotine, and they touched her, tentatively at first, and then stroking her skin with infinite gentleness, as if he hadn't believed he would ever touch a woman's face again. "I'm not talking about them," the landlady had said. So there was something else, Isabel thought, and I must find it out. Isabel slept for a couple of hours, then dressed carefully, brushed her hair, and coiled it into a chignon. As she'd hoped, there were no other customers in the grocer's. She sat on the stool provided and began to steer the conversation. "I heard that one of the bombers coming back from Germany crashed at the airfield," said Isabel. The grocer's wife turned to her, one hand on the bacon slicer, her face lit with satisfaction at being the one to tell the story. "She's not told you then?" "Who?" "Your landlady." "Well, it's no wonder. She calls herself Mrs. Atkinson these days, but her married name was Bardsley. She used to live out at Stainthorpe, at the farm near the airfield. Her husband and the babby were in the farmhouse that night when one of the aircraft tried to land in the fog." She reached for a packet of tea. "It was coming back from a raid on Berlin, and it had flak damage to the engines. Oh, it came right down on the farmhouse, ploughed it into the ground. You can still see the scar. She paused. Every soul in that farmhouse was killed, but she was in town. She had the same house then, you know, the one you're in at the minute. There was a lot went on in the war, with the men away, but her man wasn't away. She would stay over, you know, in town. She was sly, she was. Was it a girl or a boy, the baby? A lovely little boy. Oh, she never went to the funeral by all accounts, and she's never gone within a mile of the grave. It's a queer house you're lodging in. Isabel found she was holding onto the counter edge to steady herself. The noise of her own blood in her ears was like the landlady's footsteps, going faster and faster. Philip was back from the hospital. "Isabel!" As soon as he saw her, he jumped up, put his arm around her and led her to a chair. "You don't look well. I've been worried about you. I was wondering, if there was any possibility—" "Oh, God," she thought. "He thinks I might be pregnant. I might be pregnant." She thought of the hut and Alec. The Lancaster crashed. They were all killed. That was what she had heard and seen as she waited by the perimeter fence. "But I've done nothing," she told herself. "It's not real. None of it is real. He's dead and gone. The war has been over for years. I'm going to have Philip's child." With a huge effort, she smiled up at her husband. "It's far too soon to be sure," she said, hating herself as his face lit up. Later, in the dressing table mirror, Isabel saw the greatcoat lying on her side of the bed. She got up and put it back in the cupboard, where it belonged. In the night, she woke. The weight was on her again, pushing her down. She put out her hand and felt the thick, woolen cloth. Terror crawled over her skin, and she lay dead still, not daring to reach out or speak to Philip. She had to get it out of the house and into Philip's car. Holding the greatcoat out as if it were burning, she thrust the thing into the boot. The coat was gone. Philip was going to see the bank manager about a mortgage. Soon they would leave the flat behind and the landlady and never see her again. She knew that she could sleep now. It was over. The house was everything that Philip had ever wanted. Isabel was pregnant with Michael then. He arrived 2 or 3 weeks early, according to Philip's calculations. He was a big, fair infant, and his eyes were blue. It was early August, and Philip was out in the garden with Michael. Isabel had been sleeping. She wasn't well. Perhaps she was pregnant again. The dazzle of the afternoon sun hit her as she stepped out of the door. There was Philip, patiently digging dandelions out of the yellowing grass. But the playpen was empty. Her breath caught. She felt the pounding of her heart. "Philip, the greatcoat. You've put him on the greatcoat." She ran across the grass. There was the baby looking up at her out of those eyes that were such a deep blue that they were almost navy. She snatched him up and held him to her so tightly that even placid Michael wriggled in protest. "Why did you bring that thing here? I asked you to get rid of it. I don't want it in the house. I want you to burn it." "Don't be silly. I'll keep it out in the shed if you're so bothered about it." "You fool," she thought. "You fool." "Oh, I forgot to tell you. You remember our old landlady?" How could he possibly imagine she'd forgotten? "Cerebral hemorrhage. She's in hospital in York. It's not usually a very bright outlook. When Philip had gone, she lay down on the blanket beside Michael. It was cool in the shade. The tree rustled. She opened her eyes. Michael was sitting up beside her, crowing and stretching out his arms to the distance. She looked where he was looking. Alec was walking towards her, in his greatcoat, despite the heat of the day. As he crossed the lawn, he smiled at Isabel, a warm, brilliant smile. "I've been looking for you everywhere." He bent down and lifted the baby from the blanket. He handled Michael confidently, as if he had held him many times, and Michael, she could see, was happy with him. She did not stir. She could not. The world was dissolving, breaking up around her. "Listen, Lizzie, briefing's at 4. The gen is that it'll be the big city tonight for sure. Tell Jeff you've got to go into town tonight. I'll come to the flat, whatever happens. I'll be there as soon as I can after the debrief." Isabel's hair crisped at the roots with terror. He was back there, between the 26th and 27th Ops. He hadn't got away after all. Lizzie. Had it always been Lizzie he was looking for? She'd thought it had been Isabel he'd mouthed, that first time through the glass. But it might have been Elizabeth. The landlady's presence thickened around her. Michael was so peaceful, gazing at the man whose eyes were the colour of his own. Gooseflesh rose on Isabel's arms. "Give the baby to me a minute. I think he's wet. I'll have to change him, Alec. Wait here." "But I can't stay long," he burst out, and his face twisted. She saw the exhaustion etched into it, the dark stains under his eyes, the twitch in his right cheek. He'd had enough, and he knew it. Death couldn't wipe the fear from his eyes, not while she still kept him coming back to her. His arms were around her. He held her carefully, so as not to scare the child. He whispered in her ear, "Lizzie, Lizzie, Izzy, Izzy." She thought, she has almost got what she wanted. They are almost back together. The landlady, Alec, the child. He'd been outside for so long, in the dark and cold. Why not empty herself and let the landlady return, so that Alec could stay? It was what Elizabeth Atkinson had wanted year after year. She had walked that floor all night long, waiting and wanting, until she brought him back. But what did she bring him back to? The worst days. 4 more ops to go, and then tour expired. That wasn't love. It was more like vengeance. "You don't have to go into town after the debriefing," she said. "You can come here. Jeff's going over to his brother's to help with the milking tomorrow. I'll tell him to sleep there, so he can make an early start. It'll only be me and the baby here." He smiled at her. "I do love you, you know." "I know you do." They kissed quickly, a light, dry kiss of the kind lovers can afford when they know they will be together again within hours. He walked into the shadow of the path. He didn't turn back. That night, the garden was still. She lifted Michael from his cot, wrapped him in a shawl, and walked over the dewy grass to the medlar tree. The churring of a hidden nightjar spilled from the orchard behind her. The warm air stirred, smelling of grass. Suddenly, the sound of the nightjar was cut. From the far distance, there came the low rumble of a Lancaster, like an incoming storm. Quickly, she ran over the dewy grass away from the house. In the moonlight, a woman appeared at her bedroom window. She had pushed aside the blackout blind and was standing, looking up at the sky, holding her baby in her arms. Lizzie. Freezing air washed over Isabel. The clear summer moonlight thickened into fog. It was winter now, and the early hours of morning. They had been all the way to the big city, and now they were limping home. The sound wasn't right. It must mean that the plane had engine damage. The Lank was behind her, descending towards the airfield. The runway flare path was lit, and the chance light waiting. But he could not get her down. "Get down, you bitch," he said, as the Lank fought him and the runway slid past. And then the throttles were rammed forward, the two remaining engines screaming as they struggled to climb. They cleared the admin block, and they were over the trees, and then the ground went up, and the undercart, the bloody undercart. The grey farmhouse with the green back door exploded as the Lank came down. There was a fraction of a second, maybe, when the inferno bloomed around Alec, before he felt it, and was obliterated by it. It was over. A long time later, Isabel opened her eyes. It was a summer's night. Once again the moon shone clear. The nightjar chirred. She was in the moon shadow, under the medlar tree with Michael in her arms. The air was still. But down on the grass, the greatcoat's heavy cloth rippled, as if a night wind were walking under it.
You're listening to the Mysterious Magpie channel. Please subscribe.